I request CSG Vasudev Murthy Garu, Secretary of the branch, to welcome the speaker with a bouquet. CA Dr. Rakesh Gupta secured his first rank in his graduation and LLB. He also did his LLM and MBA. He is the member of all the three institutes, ICI, ICMA, and ICSI. He also did his PhD. He was appointed member Income Tax Appellate Tribunal at the age of 37 years and posted at Hyderabad, but later resigned. He co-authored 2 books on search and seizures and assessment of searches, taxation of real estate developers, and joint development arrangements published by Taxman Publications. He is presently practicing as an advocate and appearing before Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, High Courts, and Supreme Court of India. Participated in United Nations Committee of Experts on International Cooperation in Tax Matters held at UN headquarters in New York in April 2017 and April 2019, and at regional headquarters in Geneva in October 2018. He is a member of International Association of Tax Judges and participated in its meetings. He was invited to address Chamber of Commerce and Industry on Finance Bill 2019 held at Abu Dhabi and Bahrain. Members, with this, I am privileged to introduce CA Dr. Rakesh Gupta to this august gathering. Sir, floor is yours.
It's already 4:45. Half of my time is gone. And so is the audience. This is always a challenge for any speaker in any post-lunch session. And that challenge becomes even murkier when there are recess in between. But then, we litigating lawyers are not unknown to this situation. Because in courts also, when we argue the matters in the post-lunch session, in what stage the learned judge or the judges, if it is a division bench, would be. Is anybody's guess. After having, the sumptuous lunch, I intend to share one anecdote. One day, Barrister Norton was arguing in a post-lunch session before my Lord Justice Mackenzie. Now, he was conversing a very important proposition of law, but then Barrister found that the learned judge is sleeping on the bench. But probably he could do very little. But then, in the next breath, he saw that not only did the judge sleep, but then his orderly also slept. Now it became very difficult for Barrister Norton to bear with it. He brought, very many books, like as we carry income tax reporters, ITRs, CTRs, DTRs. So he took a few of the books and then banged at the bar. And with that thud, the judge woke up. What happened, Barrister? What happened? The barrister said, nothing, my lord. Your orderly is not a judge. He can't enjoy that privilege which my lord enjoys. And then Lord Mackenzie got the message. And the same message I want to send to all of you. It is really very nice, to be speaking and standing before you. Now, during this corona, I mean, we all forgot how to stand because in courts also, I mean, the virtual court hearings, we sit in our chambers, and while sitting, we address to the courts. I have been told that Visakhapatnam, this is the first physical, and so it is a privilege for me, I mean, to be standing before this august gathering of the seasoned and illustrious professionals. The topic which has been given to me, I mean, though nowadays the only hot topic is that of the Finance Bill 2021, but then the organizers of this conference probably seem to have taken a calculated risk to add one more topic, I mean, which is not a very timely topic. But then let us see as we, I mean, unfold ourselves, I mean, where do I land? So there is a paradigm shift. In the morning also, the chairperson spoke about the paradigm shift because of the corona. But then corona or no corona, under the Income Tax Act, everything is going to be faceless. Assessment has gone faceless. First appeal has gone faceless. The penalty also has gone faceless. Now, with this much of facelessness, I fear and wonder, lest this stage should not take us to a stage where we all are saving for our faces. The only thing which remains to be faceless is the name of the Income Tax Act. That lest this Income Tax Act be renamed as the Faceless Income Tax Act. Now, with this Finance Bill 2021, we are witnessing that the next institution in line of fire is the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, which is the final fact-finding body. I mean, to what extent, I mean, the justice would be dispensed with in case it becomes faceless. And if it becomes faceless, whether there will be insurmountable heap of cases before the High Courts are already under pressure. But that be that as it may, as my predecessor speaker, Mr. Jatin Christopher was telling, that this government seems to be resolute to see that the policy which it has adopted, and I goes through, I mean, irrespective of any cost. So there is a paradigm shift in the matter of the levy of penalty, but then shift is only to this extent that the proceedings have to be faceless. In any case, even when the proceedings used to be, I mean, in the penalty proceedings at least, I mean, not faceless, then also, I mean, the penalty orders which used to be passed by the assessing officers in the penalty proceedings were almost and usually mechanical, bereft of application of mind. Therefore, I mean, there is not a substantive paradigm shift insofar as the real outcome, because earlier also penalty used to be levied and confirmed whenever the addition on the quantum side, I mean, used to be confirmed. And here also I do not see, I mean, much change, I mean, which would take place, merely for the reason that the penalty proceedings have also become faceless. Now, what are the penalties? The penalties are like sanctions. As we all know, I mean, this terminology, I mean, used to be coined in the context of the most powerful country of the world, America, that America has imposed sanctions against Iraq, because the Iraq, according to the wisdom of America, was found to have amassed the weapons of the mass destructions. So the penalties are the sanctions. Now, in order to compel a person to do a particular thing or for not doing a particular thing in a particular manner. The rationale of the penalty provisions can be traced back, particularly under the Income Tax Act. More particularly, in the light of the tax evasion, that it is a compensation to the state, because whenever any attempt to evade tax is made by the taxpayer, the collective conscience of the state gets pricked. And when the collective conscience of the state gets pricked, now in order to compensate the state because of the tax evasion, or at least because of an attempt to tax evasion, that state needs compensation. And therefore, I am talking of the penalties in respect of the underreported income and erstwhile concealment of particulars of income or furnishing inaccurate particulars of income. The another object of the penalty provision is to send the deterrence message that those who are prone to commit defaults, should very well know that there are sanctions, there are penalties, which are waiting to welcome, in under inverted commas, to this defaulter. But the object of penalty is not to collect revenue. The object of penalty provisions is not to break the taxpayer, but then to bend him. These are, in fact, well-established canons, well-established principles. Therefore, it takes to the next question as to what is the nature of penalty provision. Penalty provisions are considered by and large as the quasi-criminal in character. These proceedings are not considered as absolute criminal proceeding, but then somewhere between the criminal and the civil proceedings. And therefore, the determination of the penalty proceedings being in the nature of quasi-criminal, is very essential, because the lots of principles of interpretations are based upon this basic philosophy and jurisprudence. Now, because of this principle that the penalty proceedings are quasi-criminal in character, then one of the outcome of this principle is that when there is any ambiguity in the provisions of law concerning the penalty, then the view favorable to the taxpayer, because after all, penalty proceedings are the product of the quasi-criminal proceedings. And therefore, whenever there is an ambiguity in the interpretation of law, then that ambiguity will have to be resolved in favor of the taxpayer. And this is more so in case of the penalty proceedings, because the penalties are nothing but then quasi-criminal in character. Now, under the Income Tax Act, though there are no types of penalties, there are several kinds of penalties. Some penalties have got direct, proximate, inextricable link with the assessment, like under section 270 capital A. Like in case of the search, there are special penalty provisions under section 271 AAB. In case where the additions are made under section 68, 69, 69A, B, C, where the tax is charged under section 115 BBE, then there is a penalty under section 271 AAC. There are other whole hosts of penalties under the Income Tax Act, whether it is for the non-maintenance of books of account. Though you have maintained the books of accounts, you ought to have got them audited, but then you failed to obtain the audit report in time. Or you did not deduct a tax at source, you did not collect tax at source, if at all you deducted or collected, but then there was a shortfall. If you have accepted any loan or deposit otherwise then through the banking channel, and which is in excess of a particular threshold, then section 271 capital D is there. If you have made repayment of a loan or deposit otherwise then through the banking channel, then there is a penalty under section 271 capital E, provided the repayment is in respect of a loan or deposit of a particular threshold. If you happen to receive a sum of rupees 2 lakhs or more in violation of the condition under section 269 SU, then there is a penalty. So you name an incident and there is a penalty. There is a penalty under section 221, that if you are an assessee in default or deemed to be in default, then to the extent of the tax in default, the penalty can be imposed by the assessing officer. So there are various types of penalties, to some of which I'll come in little detail, because one of the latest penalties, and which has got very wide ramifications, is the penalty under section 271 AAD, penalty in respect of the false entry. So, but then before I come to the nitty-gritties and nuances of the penalty, now certain fundamental things which we all will have to bear in mind is that the principle of natural justice, will have to be accorded to the assessee before the penalty comes to be imposed. And there is a mandate under section 274 subsection 2, which says that no penalty shall be imposed unless the assessee has been heard or has been given reasonable opportunity of being heard. So any penalty, including penalty under section 221 for the non-payment or when you are held as an assessee in default, or in any kind of penalty, the principle of natural justice is embedded in the statute in the form of the mandatory provision of section 274 subsection 2. The second thing, that if the amount of penalty is more than a particular threshold, in case of an income tax officer, this amount is more than 10,000 rupees. In case of penalty comes to be imposed by assistant commissioner or deputy commissioners, then the threshold is rupees 20,000. Then no penalty can be imposed in excess of these limits by these officers unless the penalty imposition is approved by the joint commissioner. Approval, though approval, is most of the times understood in terms of the administrative approval, but then the judicial decisions are available on the basis of this jurisprudence, that when any competent authority who is a quasi-judicial authority now is to accord the approval, that approval has to be something more than mere mechanical approval. And therefore, while according the approval, that competent authority, that is the joint commissioner, now will have to demonstrate the application of mind. And in case that approval has been given in mechanical manner, bereft of application of mind, and when such kind of an approval has been challenged before the appellate authority, then appellate authorities have come very deftly against such kind of the mechanical approval. And so much so, in good number of cases, the approval given by such competent authority having been held as illegal and bad in law, even the very levy of penalty comes to be set at naught. Therefore, this principle, which will have to be borne in mind. Because the courts have always said that any quasi-judicial authority, for that matter, any public officer, now will have to give reasons for his conclusions. Because reasons provide the live link as to how that decision has been reached, and that is considered as one of the principles of natural justice. Because not only the conclusions are important, but then the process leading to that conclusion is equally important. Because unless the process leading to the conclusion is made known, becomes part of the order, and that order is appealable, or the order becomes the subject matter of writ, then how can the appellate court or the writ court, would come to a conclusion whether that process leading to the conclusions can be said to be in accordance with law or not. Therefore, this is the cardinal principle of the dispensation of justice. Now before I come to the nitty-gritties of certain sections, the penalties, now one more very important defense mechanism which is there under the Act. But I tell you, it has been my experience, and so must be yours also who may be dealing in litigation, that this defense mechanism is not very often resorted to by my friends, chartered accountants and lawyers. And I have seen that because of this defense mechanism being not put in practice, not being put in motion, I have seen that very many good cases are liable to be lost and are lost. I see day in and day out. Therefore, I thought that I will begin my these deliberations today from that defense mechanism which is there in the statute. And the defense mechanism is in the form of section 273 capital B. Section 273 capital B, which is applicable in case of the most of the penalties. Now you can take out section 270 capital A outside 273B. You can take out the erstwhile section 271(1)(c) outside the ambit of section 273 capital B. You can take out section 271(AD) also from outside the ambit of section 273 capital B. But then other hosts of penalties which are umpteen number in penalties, all are subject to section 273 capital B. And what is section 273 capital B? The section says that no penalty shall be imposed. Under all these sections of penalty, if the person committing the default proves to the satisfaction of the penalty imposing authority that there was a reasonable cause for the commission of default. So if you have not maintained books of account, the penalty is initiated if you can demonstrate to the penalty imposing authority, who is an assessing officer in this case, that here are the reasons which constitute reasonable cause and because of which this default has come to be committed. And then section 273B says that in that situation the penalty will not be imposed. Or if at all the penalty comes to be imposed because the assessing officers are hell-bent upon imposing penalty, but then the appellate authority will definitely take that into account. So section 273 capital B, provides such defense. And then whether there is a reasonable cause in a particular case or not is something which is essentially dependent upon the facts of a case. There is no law. Or if at all there is any law, that will come little later. And you will find, and that has been my experience and so must be yours, then the defaults are not committed for the sake of pleasure. Whenever there is any default committed by the SSE, and that SSE happening to receive the penalty notice, you discuss with that client, or you discuss with the accountant of that client, then the client or his accountant, and they would reveal that there was some reason because of which the default has come to be collected. So if the tax has not been deducted at source in time, then he would tell us the person who was responsible for the deduction of tax at source all of a sudden left, and because of which everything went into tizzy. Everything, went haywire. Now if your client has paid or repaid any amount otherwise than through the banking channel in respect of any loan or deposit, you discuss with him, then you will find, yes, there was some cause because of which the payment had to be made in cash. He may come forward and may well say that because the check issued by him got dishonored and therefore the other person refused to accept anything other than the cash. So you will find for every default, or in case a person has not been able to get his books of accounts audited, then he may come out and may well say to you, sir, because of some criminal proceedings which are going on amongst the partners, and because of that there was a lack of unanimity, and because of that there was obstruction, and because of that the books of accounts could not be completed, and so was the audit. So what I wish to emphasize is that the defaults are not committed for the sake of pleasure. You can and you must, and as a chartered accountant, you must ascertain the facts behind it. I always say, and even at the cost of repetition I would say, though there was no occasion for me to repeat here in Visakhapatnam because I have been called for the first time, and that too given the last session. Now you can very well understand my agony. It is a big gamble. You had come all the way from Delhi, and then, you have been made to wait till the last session. I do not know. The organizers were testing whose patience. But anyway, I always say that the audience in my gatherings are those who understand tax laws. And हमारे Guru Granth Sahib, you understand Hindi? In our Guru Granth Sahib, Guru Gobind Singh said, 1.25 lakh से एक लड़ा हूँ. So my each audience is equivalent to 1,25,000 in number. So you can very well make out and understand. My audience is so big. Even if there are certain empty chairs staring at my face, but then there is no cause for any disappointment with me. Yes, so I was on this point. So you find the cause, and then yes, I was on this, that I always say that the chartered accountants are the master of facts. Now you will find the latest trend in chartered accountants. They renounce the certificate of practice as chartered accountant. They take certificate of practice as a lawyer. And those chartered accountants turned lawyer who practice on the taxation side, or for that matter on any side of the law, since they are master of facts, they can present, because after all, the case law is not decided in vacuum. There are facts on the basis of, on the foundation of fact, then the law is evolved. And therefore, the chartered accountants turned lawyer are very successful before the High Court and Supreme Court. Now, I remember, somebody, and many people ask me, Rakesh ji, you are now practicing as a lawyer. So you have, you are no longer a chartered accountant. I mean that is such a loaded statement against me, because that is the only degree, which speaks of the amount of labor and hard work which I must have put. The rest of the degrees which I have had, whether company secretary or the cost accountant, the LLB or LLM or MBA or PhD, they are after the chartered accountancy. So if somebody says that I am no longer a chartered accountant is something, he does a great injustice to my hard work. A chartered accountant is the degree. I am chartered accountant by heart. Maybe practicing as a lawyer because of the occupational compulsions, because as chartered accountant we cannot go to the High Court and Supreme Court. But then I always say that the chartered accountants are the master of facts. And in the same breath do I say that the facts are like the arguments of God. So when we are chartered accountants, master of facts, and the facts are like the arguments of God, now you can very well understand and appreciate the importance of being chartered accountant. We are so near to God. And therefore, despite we being so near to God, being master of facts, facts are like arguments of God, and yet we do not ascertain from that client or his accountant as to what has caused this kind of the commission of this default, then I would say that we probably may not have done justice to our profession. So when the cause is told, whether the cause is conveyed by the client or his accountant which has led to the commission of the default, then that cause in itself may not be the reasonable cause, because the legislature has used the expression reasonable cause. It is not cause simpliciter. It is a cause which hits the reason of a person who is listening that cause is a reasonable cause, and then is constant to say, oh, if this is a cause, then there is a justification in that cause. So that is the barometer, that is the touchstone, that is the parameter with reference to which a cause, when advanced by a person, can be said to be a reasonable cause. As the term reasonable itself suggests, that something which hits the reason of a man. Therefore, as I said, that reasonable cause is something which depends upon the facts of each case, and then the facts are supposed to be within your special knowledge who has committed the default. Therefore, the burden to prove that there was a reasonable cause is on the shoulders of the SSE. And when I say on the shoulders of the SSE, then of course we chartered accountants act for and on behalf of the SSE, and therefore it becomes our bounden duty, to put forth those facts before the penalty imposing authorities, whether it is an assessing officer or whether it is joint commissioner, whether it is assistant commissioner, because certain penalties, can be imposed by the joint commissioners. So the trial stage, the assessing officer or the joint commissioner, the first stage. Now you must burden his file with the help of those evidences which establish that there was a reasonable cause. And in case you deter, in case you omit, now for whatever reason, whether that omission is because of the negligence or because of some commission or because of whatever reason, then you are causing a serious prejudice to the case and cause of your client. And therefore I always say that the law of pleading says that factual pleadings, factual averments, factual evidences, in order to prove a particular fact, must be placed before the court of original jurisdiction. And therefore, the court of original jurisdiction in the matter of establishing the fact of reasonable cause is the assessing officer, or that officer now who has been vested with the jurisdiction to impose penalty. There can be direct and documentary evidences. Like suppose if that employee has left, you must be having some evidence which proves that the person has left all of a sudden. You must have issued some disciplinary notice to him, show cause, or some advertisement you must have in the newspaper. If you have repaid otherwise then through the banking channel any amount of loan, then the factum that the check has been dishonored or comes to be dishonored, there must be some evidence for it. So if you have not deducted the tax at source or short deducted the tax at source, there must be some reason. There can be direct and documentary evidences in support of that reasonable cause. Put it. But then there may well be certain situations for which there cannot be the documentary evidences. Like somebody can say, my client can say, and when I say my client can say, I genuinely mean it, that he genuinely says it, that he was not aware about this position of law. And because he was not aware about this position of law, he was ignorant as to the position of law, and therefore because of his ignorance as to the position, all of this default is committed. Now after hearing this kind of a statement, that even ignorance can constitute a cause, somebody can wonder. Now if that can be the cause, that to the reasonable cause, then every Tom, Dick and Harry now would advance the ignorance of the law as a reasonable cause. But no, the burden is on you to prove it. When your client happens to make a statement of fact that he was unaware as to this position of law, then it will be for him to demonstrate, and there cannot be any direct and documentary evidence for it. And that is why when there are no direct and documentary evidences available for establishing a particular fact situation, then the circumstantial evidences are the next best level of evidence. And I always say, even to this extent, that the direct and documentary evidences can be fabricated, maneuvered, manufactured, fabricated. But then the circumstances can never be manufactured, because the circumstances are the product of, as the things are moving, in normal way of life. Therefore, the circumstances cannot be maneuvered. And therefore, if a client says that he was really ignorant about the position of law, then he will have to bring evidence on record, circumstances on record, and you as a chartered accountant then must be in a position to weave those facts in such a manner, bring out those circumstances in your reply in such a manner that there should not be any gaps, there should not be any inconsistency, there should not be any contradiction, there should not be any seepage, there should not be any leakage amongst the various factual averments which you make, highlighting the circumstances which establish that there was a reasonable cause and your client was really ignorant. Somebody can say that how can the ignorance of law constitute a cause in the first place? You forget about the reasonable cause. And those who ask this question, should advert to the decision of the Supreme Court in Motilal Padampa Sugar Mills 118 ITR, in which their lordships happened to deal this kind of an argument. And their lordships said, it's often said that everybody knows the law and should know the law. But then there is no such maxim which is known to the word of taxation. The taxation laws which are changing at such fast pace, where even the seasoned professionals find it difficult to keep abreast, then what to say of a common man? And therefore, in the matter of taxation laws, a reasonable cause can be, ignorance of law can be the reasonable cause. Now friends, I want to take up the penalty under section 271 AD, because I am racing against time. My flight's time is there. Half of the time had gone into the rituals. Therefore, section 271 AD, though I can keep on discussing about the principles of law, but I have got some feeling that we chartered accountants are very slow to, at times are not interested in knowing, such fine, points of law, because ultimately, we are, working, somehow to file reply, but then, these are very fine points on which the entire jurisprudence of the penalty are dependent. But then be that as it may, I am not on that. I am in section 271 AD. Section 271 AD now is the penalty which was inserted into the statute by Finance Act 2020. And I remember the post-pandemic, during the lockdown, this section was the first section on which, I and my nephew, Somil, happened to write an article. And that article I have circulated, I have sent to the Visakhapatnam branch, and then I have requested chairperson to kindly disseminate it amongst the members. And those who are interested, to know the nitty-gritties and the nuances of this penalty, another penalty under section 270 capital A, then I would request and urge them to kindly go through. 271 AAD was brought, as I said, by Finance Act 2020 to take effect from 1st of April 2020 itself. And the section says that notwithstanding anything contained in any other provisions of this Act, during the course of any proceeding, in the books of accounts maintained by the person, if there is any false entry or there is any omitted entry which has got the impact on the computation of total income, then the assessing officer may impose penalty on such person equal to the aggregate value of false entry or omitted entry. This is subsection 1 of section 271 AAD. Subsection 2 I will come later. Now 271 AAD, subsection 1, now has been enacted by the legislature to take care of the menace of the fake, forged and fabricated invoices. With the advent of the goods and services tax, the input tax credit now is sought to be claimed on the basis and on the strength of such false, fabricated and forged invoices. You may be reading in the newspapers every day. And you may very well appreciate the enormity of this problem. Therefore, having regard to the enormity of this problem, the reports were coming to the government that this is happening. Pernicious practice of issuing the fake bills is on the rampage, and because of which the public exchequer is bleeding, the false credits of the incorrect input tax credits are being claimed, and therefore the provisions like penalty provisions like section 271 AAD come to be enacted. Though that provision is very harsh, but I always say that when the pernicious practices are carried on for a considerable period of time and they are carried out in such a manner that so as to prick the collective conscience of the society, then the society calls for change. And that is how the law is evolved. You may very well recall the 2013 incident in Delhi in the case of Nirbhaya. The society is, what is law? Law is a manifestation of the societal aspirations. The society aspires for change, and the change, when is brought by the legislature, at times it is brought as a measure of the knee-jerk reaction. And when something is done in a knee-jerk fashion, then it becomes very harsh, it operates very harsh. So 271 AAD in the present form, though operates very harsh, but then probably that was the call of the hour. And therefore it starts with a non-obstante clause, notwithstanding anything contained in any other provisions of this Act. That means that so far as the levy of this penalty is concerned, it is absolute. The moment there is a default, which is contemplated in section 271 AAD, the penalty is inevitable, irrespective of the fact that for this very default, there may be levy of interest, there may be levy of tax, there may be levy of tax at 78%, there may be a case of prosecution. But so far as the levy of penalty is concerned, it cannot be contested by any SSE simply on the ground that, sir, for this very default I have already been punished. I have already paid the tax. I have already paid the tax of 78%. I have already been prosecuted. That is why the legislature has started this section with a non-obstante clause. That shows the seriousness. Because what happens? The moment there is a penalty or penal action for one and the same default more than once, the SSEs come, sir, the rule of double jeopardy. I cannot be punished twice for one and the same default. It is against the constitutional provisions of Article 20, sub-Article 3 of the Constitution. But then the rule of double jeopardy is not applicable in case of the tax proceedings, number one. Number two, the defense under Article 20, sub-Article 3 is in respect of the criminal prosecution. And even though the penalties are considered as quasi-criminal in character, but then the Supreme Court has said on more than one occasion that even though it is considered as quasi-criminal in character, but then they are essentially of civil nature. Therefore, section 271 AAD starts with non-obstante clause. Then it says, in any proceeding under the Income Tax Act. So this default, must be found during the course of any proceeding under the Income Tax Act. That proceeding may be the assessment proceeding, that proceeding may be 201 proceeding, that proceeding may be the TDS proceeding, the proceeding may be the Commissioner Appeals proceeding, that proceeding may be of any proceeding, but then all that should be that it should be under the provisions of the Income Tax Act. But then, if it has been found in any proceeding before any officer who is not the assessing officer, then that authority, that officer is required to communicate along with the entire material which has come into his possession to the assessing officer of this person. And on the basis of that material being supplied by other wings of the tax department, now this assessing officer now then would be entitled to initiate penal action. But then that proceeding must be under the provisions of the Income Tax Act, and the proceedings must be under the Income Tax Act. But then the proceedings may be of different kind. Therefore, if any proceeding, now suppose was being carried out before the SFIU or before the GST authorities, and this kind of a default is detected, then those authorities are not shut out from communicating this fact along with the material in their possessions to the assessing officer of this person under the Income Tax Act. And then this income tax officer, the assessing officer of this person, now on the basis of the material having been supplied by the authorities under the different acts, then will form a view, an opinion that yes, it is a case which calls for the imposition of penalty, and therefore may initiate the penalty process. And of course, then thereafter the opportunity hearing will be given there. So this penalty, but then can be imposed when there is a books of accounts maintained. But if the books of accounts are not maintained, like somebody can say, sir, I am not required to maintain books of account because I declare my income under section 44 AD. But then the maintenance of books of account, where there is a false entry or there is an omission of an entry, now is a sine qua non. Like you may be aware under section 68 of the Income Tax Act also. The edict of the law is that when any sum is found credited in the books of account, and there are plethoras of judicial decisions which say that the maintenance of books of account where this credit appears is a sine qua non, is a mandate. Similarly, the maintenance of books of account for the purpose of initiation and imposition of penalty in 271 is a must. If there are no books, then under subsection 1, if at all the penalty can be imposed, now is $1 million question. Now, what is the substantive default which is envisaged under section 271 AD? That is that there must be false entry. Now, false entry now has been given a definite meaning, and that definite meaning has been given under the explanation. That when there is actual use or intention to use the false piece of documentary evidences in the form of the false invoices, then it is a case of false entry. Now, during the course of survey, now some fake invoices are found. They may not have yet been entered in the books of account. But the very fact, those fake or fudged or fabricated invoices are found. Now, there can be taken as a presumption that obviously, they have not been retained by that person for the purpose of any ornamental value. There would always be an intention to use them. Therefore, fake, fudged, fabricated invoices, are the category, which would be termed as false entry. Omission of any entry in the books of accounts for the purpose of which have got the bearing on the computation of taxable income. So, if these defaults are found by the assessing officer in the books of accounts of a person maintained by him during the course of an income tax proceedings, then notwithstanding any other consequence which is there under the Income Tax Act, then the assessing officer can impose penalty on this person equal to the aggregate amount of false entries and the omitted entries. Subsection 2 of section 271 AD. Now it says that any other person who may have led and caused and abetted this first mentioned person to enter false entries or to omit entry from his books of account, now can also be penalized under this section by this very assessing officer equal to the aggregate amount of the false entry and omitted entry. Now you can very well imagine the enormity of this section. Because for one and the same thing, so many persons can be penalized. The total impact of the penalty may be many times more than the false or omitted entries, because anybody who has abetted, who has caused this person, he can also be penalized for an equal amount. Therefore, this penalty has got multifarious, multilateral consequences on multi-persons. And therefore, but then the question which comes into the mind, now the burden of proof, will rest on whom? The moment there are invoices found, it will automatically lead to the imposition of penalty. No. First of all, kindly remember I said there is section 274 subsection 1 which says that no penalty shall be imposed unless the person has been heard or has been given a reasonable opportunity of being heard. So this penalty is not automatic. He will begin show cause notice, and after the receipt of his response and reply, then the assessing officer may take a call now whether this case warrants the levy of penalty or not. But the burden of proof, as I said, these are the quasi-criminal proceedings. In criminal and quasi-criminal proceedings, the burden of proof lies on the person who makes an allegation. Now here the allegation that these are the fake, false and first invoices now is being made by the revenue. And of course revenue is being represented by the assessing officer. So the burden to prove that the action of this assessee falls within the fitments of section 217 AAD now rests on the shoulders of the assessing officer. Once that burden is discharged, then this burden will come back in the court of the assessee, because this is always like a game of ping pong. You discharge burden. I hit the ball in the game of ping pong from my court. It goes to the court of other person. And thereafter it will be his responsibility to hit it back in my court. So this is how the burden, keeps on shifting. So the next, therefore the opportunity will be given. But then that section 273B, reasonable cause, that defense is not available. And probably that defense has not been made available in case of the fake, first and false invoices under this ostensible ground, that what can be the justification for a person to advance. Because my predecessor speaker Jatinji was also saying, when you yourself admit a particular tax liability, there is no need even for you to be given an opportunity of hearing. Now here, at least opportunity of hearing is there, but then the benefit of setting up a reasonable cause under section 273B is not there for the penalty under section 271 AAD. And therefore, this fine legal point needs to be borne in mind. Then another question which is often asked, and even this section also contains that kind of a word, that the assessing officer may. Like this may is there in several penalties. Like if you remember under section 270(11)(c), though now it has been replaced by section 270 capital A. Now even that section also used that there is a concealment of particulars of income or furnishing inaccurate particulars of income, then the assessing officer or the commissioner appeal or the principal commissioner may. And therefore the question which comes in the minds of those then who are keen listener about the jurisprudence as to what is this meaning of may, because the may word suggests as if there is an absolute discretion. And therefore, somebody can ask, now when the legislature uses the expressions may, now does it mean that this falls within the absolute discretion of that officer to impose or not to impose penalty? To impose or not to impose penalty. When I communicate with you, I tell you, you may be listening for the first time. I communicate with God. I do not speak from here, I speak from here. Any obstruction, disturbs my meditation. It is a mode of meditation for me. So, the question comes, whether this may, used by the legislature, gives a discretion to the assessing officer. Otherwise, the legislature could have said the assessing officer shall. Because shall, the user of word shall makes at least ostensibly that provision to have the mandate of law. The courts have said that even if the legislature uses the expressions may, given a discretion to a public officer or quasi-judicial authority, but that discretion is a judicial discretion. It is not an arbitrary discretion or a discretion which can be exercised arbitrarily at mere whim and fancy of that officer. There are certain principles based upon which the discretion can be exercised by a public officer. And those principles are that whenever it has to be seen whether a particular officer in whom the jurisdiction was vested, now whether has exercised the jurisdiction in accordance with law or not, then it has to be seen by the higher writ court or by the higher appellate authority. Now whether the principles of justice, the principles of equity, and the principles of good conscience have been kept in mind by that authority before exercising his discretion or not. The moment the appellate court or the writ court finds that the discretion which has been exercised cannot be said to have been exercised on the barometers of these three elements which I just mentioned. That is why when we argue as the litigating lawyer, or for that matter the chartered accountant, because till the stage of the income tax appellate tribunal, I mean most of us as a chartered accountant do appear. And therefore, when we assail the discretion having been exercised or discretion having not been exercised in a particular manner by a public officer, then we try to demonstrate to the court, sir, this discretion has been or has not been exercised on the touchstone of the objectivity, on the touchstone of the reasonableness, on the touchstone of the fairness, on the touchstone of the conscientiousness. This officer was not objective, fair, reasonable, conscientious. And when this argument now pricks the conscience of the court or the adjudicatory authority, then the decision comes in our favor. So, even if the legislature may have used the expressions may, but depending upon the context in which it has been used, number one. Number two, the discretion having been vested in him which has to be exercised on certain established principle of law, and therefore this may will have or will acquire the force of word shall. And similarly, converse the situation. Legislature may have used the expression shall, but then depending upon the context, it may be given the meaning as if there is a discretion. Like if you remember, now an audit report, unless used to be filed along with the return of income, certain deductions of 80IA, 80IB, 80IC, the section says that it cannot be allowed, it shall not be allowed. The departmental authorities used to say, so legislature used the expression shall. The moment it has not been filed along with the return of income, that should be the end of the matter. Now the court said no, though word shall is there, we can very well appreciate the emphasis of the legislature as to the requirement of filing the return of income, filing the audit report along with the return of income, but then we have to see the context and we cannot go merely by the user of expression shall. Anyway, so then section 270 capital A. Section 270 capital A now is the substitution of erstwhile section 270(11)(c). Section 270(11)(c), we had witnessed under 1961 Act 270(11)(c) was there. Under 1922 Act, this section was in a different form, but then this section was there. The section 270(11)(c) witnessed several amendments from time to time, because after all, law keeps on evolving. I always say law keeps on evolving with passage of time and with the experience the legislature gains over the years. So whenever the legislature gains experience over the years, then it adjusts and readjusts. But then 270(11)(c) was found through the Finance Act 2016 that it has not been able to give quietus to the rising litigations, and therefore, the then Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, he brought section 270 capital in the statute in place of section 270(11)(c). Because under section 270(11)(c), now one very important thing which proved the last nail in that section's coffin was the non-recording of satisfaction by the assessing officer. Now, we all used to take this plea before the appellate authority that the satisfaction has not been recorded during the course of assessment. And the absence of recording of satisfaction was found by the courts successively as hitting at the root of the levy of the penalty, and those penalties used to be struck down. And though nothing has come out so clearly in the public domain on this aspect, but then, that is because memorandum says that section 270(11)(c) had given lots of litigation. But then I want to ask a question. This section was there in 1961. This section was there under 1922 statute. Now, for how many years after that you could come to realize that section 270(11)(c) or old section 28(1)(c) of the 1922 Act now has not been able to prevent the generation of litigation. I always find, like in this finance bill also, you must have found the clarification which has come on PF and ESI. Now, as a counsel, I may take the benefit, I may claim to have the satisfaction that this clarification is as a result of, certain judicial decisions to which I was the party before the Delhi High Court and the Supreme Court. Because that Alom extrusion, 319 ITR Supreme Court on employer's contribution was argued by me. Then Emil Limited, Delhi High Court, on employee's contribution, was argued by me, and which is sought to be nullified by virtue of the proposed clarifications. But then I always say, Emil Limited was cited in 321 ITR. And today we are in the regime of about 445 ITR. 6 ITRs come in a year. Now you can very well imagine, by finding the difference in the number of years divided by 6, that how many years back, that decision was rendered, now which is proposed to be nullified now. Under section 1023C 3I AD, this proposed amendment is seeking to nullify the decision of the Karnataka High Court in Children's Education Society that the limit of 1 crore should not be taken to be referring with reference to each institution. Now this proposed amendment says that aggregate of 5 crores will have to be seen by taking the receipts of all institutions. But then that decision was also in 372 ITR. You wait for a number of years, you allow a lot of water to flow in the river Ganges. Now, in your case, I can say in river Godavari or Krishna, and then you come out with the amendment. Now, what would happen? Those decisions, which have attained finality, now the Damocles sword will keep on looming large. So, 270(11)(c) was found in 2016, to be buried or to be consigned into the dustbin of history. And in its place, section 270 capital A, now which says that assessing officer or the commissioner appeal or the principal commissioner in any proceedings before them shall direct, if there is an underreported income, to pay penalty. Now, they are not required to be satisfied because the legislature became wiser. The satisfaction of the assessing officer, has proved very costly to the exchequer in terms of the deletion of penalties. But then the other article which I have sent to Visakhapatnam branch, and which, because the corona has given a lot of time, I do not know whether those articles have reached you or not. On section 270, I and my nephew Somil, have written this article. In fact, the corona, I tell you, though has given a lot of pain and anguish, but there are certain positive things also. At least for me, I can say that I and Somil had written several articles. We revised our books. We wrote one more book on survey. They are under printing because of the corona, they could not be printed. Then pre-corona, I addressed about 102 webinars. Pre-corona, somebody can wonder, how is pre-corona? Corona is still on. Pre-corona, is the dissection of the period like we used to dissect the Mauryan period, because I myself got corona and in the month of October and November. And prior to that, for me it is a pre-corona period. So 102 webinars there, and thereafter about 8 to 10 webinars I have addressed. So, it has been very enriching from this perspective that, we could find time. Otherwise, we litigating lawyers, hardly find time because the day is spent in the courts. In the evening, then you have to prepare the next day's case, then you have to meet the clients also. But somehow, this time, has been very enriching from academic point of view. So section 270A article, which has been written, you can very well ask from the, branch office bearers. I have sent it to morning only. If you read section 270 capital A, read with explanation there, then section 275. Now we have found, discovered and proved that despite the legislature's overdrive not to use the expression satisfaction, there are other so many things into the scheme of the act which would require the assessing officer to record satisfaction, and if the assessing officer is or does not record satisfaction, even under the new law of section 270 capital A, then also the initiation of penalty will be declared bad by the competent courts or the higher appellate courts. So if there is underreported income, what is underreported income? The difference. If you read section 270 capital A, you'll get confused. The sum and substance of the underreported income is when there is a difference between the assessed income and the processed income. That the difference is underreported income. And for this underreported income, now 6 situations have been given under, or 5 situations have been given under subsection 6. If you prove that your explanation is bona fide, if you prove that the addition or disallowance was made on estimate, if you prove that the estimate made by you or the made by assessing officer is bona fide, then there are 5 exhaustive situations. And if you are able to bring your case within the parameters of section 6, then the penalty under section 270 capital A now is liable to be deleted. In fact, the rigor, which was there under section 271(1)(c), now has been greatly relaxed. It may not be the conscious act on the part of the legislature, but the way section 270A has been drafted, then in reality I can say, because I, having been litigating for a number of years, I can say, with whatever little authority at my command, with utmost humility of course, that the rigor of section 270 capital A now is somewhat softer, milder as compared to the erstwhile section 271(1)(c). Friends, it's already 5:45. Now I have to report because my flight is 7:40. I have to reach to the airport, though I can keep on speaking for hours together. And this is my passion. I earn my prosperity by speaking. So, but then there is a time limit. And for that, partly I am also responsible. Why I am responsible? I cannot say that you are responsible because, you have invited me. And therefore, I can say this is my responsibility because, but then I am very much thankful, to all of you, to your branch, to chairperson, for extending me a very nice hospitality, and without which it probably would not have been possible for me to have come to Visakhapatnam, because yesterday I had to, address on finance bill before the Northern India Regional Council from 4:30 to 7:30, and which I did in my hotel room. Today also I had to give one lecture on, that I already finished, and therefore I came day before yesterday, and but then that was also an attempt on my part to be away from the Delhi's cold. Here the weather is quite pleasant. But anyway, thank you for the nice hospitality and for very patient ears extended to me. Thank you from the core of my heart.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your kind words. Sir, your presentation on penalties is lucid and showed us a different dimension of dealing with penalties. I am sure members present here are immensely benefited. Thank you very much, sir. I request CA S. Murli Krishna, Vice Chairman of Visakhapatnam branch, to present a memento to CA Dr. Rakesh Gupta as a token of remembrance. Thank you, sir. May I now request CA G. Vasudev Murthy, Secretary of the branch, to propose vote of thanks for the conference.
Good evening to all of you. Sir, friends, please be seated for 2 minutes because last Janaganamana song is there, our patriot song. We have to respect our national anthem, not for my vote of thanks. So, because our Rakesh Gupta ji has come from Delhi, he has waited from morning to till evening. So, really hats off his presence and patience. So, in spite of it, as put it by Master of Ceremonies, he has added a new dimension to the Master of Ceremony, a Master of penalties and meanings of the penalties. So, thank you. So, morning session we have already said the vote of thanks for the inaugural session. However, that we will continue. So, I would like to acknowledge my gratitude to all my members who actually participated directly and indirectly and made this Udditi 3 successful. And further to the vote of thanks, in the inaugural session, I would like to express heartfelt thanks to CA, today's resource person CA Avinash Gupta ji and CA Jatin Christopher ji and CA Rakesh Gupta ji for their excellent deliberations on the topics given to them: union budget, analysis of direct tax proposals, and real estate transactions under GST, and critical analysis of penal provision under Income Tax Act. Really wonderful deliberations, really wonderful subjects, really wonderful speakers, and excellent deliberations, and our members are really benefited, sir. So further to that, I express my heartfelt thanks to all the students who have rendered the good service for this event and helped to made this event a successful one. And I express my heartfelt thanks to all past chairmen, NRA Hospital and their staff having put the stall and extended the medical services. I also thank, not but the least, all the participants and patiently heard this conference and participated in the deliberations and raised the questions and made it lively. And thanks to, without you, there is no glory and success. So the entire success goes to all the participants physically and virtually participated in this conference. Thank you, my dear professional colleagues. I also thank Hotel Taj, who has given this hall and helped us and served the very good food. I also thank all this technical team and especially Swaroop. And morning we have seen him. He has received an award from the hands of our president because he has been praised by the finance minister. See, Swaroop ji also extended this technical support and also this other electrical support have given this technical team and other persons. So really thanks to one and all, and thanks to first and not the least, I thanks to my great chairperson, C.H.E. Bharti Devi, who has given me the opportunity, and thanks to her in person. So, thank you one and all. If I have forgotten anybody, please excuse me. Thank you one and all. Now we will sing Janaganamana, national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा। जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता। जय हे